Welcome to another episode of Rattling the Stars. I know a lot of people know my obsession with Peter Pan, and this interview is part of that obsession. Today I get to talk with some of the lost boys from the Cathy Rigby filmed version from 2000 of Peter Pan the stage musical. So I'm going to have them introduce themselves to you.
Hi, my name is Michelle Berti, and I actually didn't get to do the film because I left to go to grad school right before it, but I was with the tour for 2 years, and I was the principal understudy for a number of the Lost Boys and Jane in the second year for Wendy.
Hi, I'm Hally McGehean, and I played Tootles and Jane and was the Wendy cover for about 2 years of the altogether probably of our Broadway production and tour and the film.
And hi, I'm Alon Williams. I played Curly, and I was, I've been the only Curly for a while. I did the Broadway production a couple of times, and the film, and the tour a couple of times.
And Peter Pan, this production has such a wide background because I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but Cathy, I think, started the Broadway production back in 1990, and it kind of was off and on, and then the tour happened, and then it was finally filmed in 2000. So when did each of you, do you remember what year you guys came on board? Because it sounds like there was always a lot of people who got to be in this production, which is great.
Yes, I absolutely remember. It was 1999. And I replaced Aileen Quinn after their first Broadway run. And then I got to go on tour for a little while, and then we did another Broadway run. And then we went on tour again, and then we filmed the movie. And then that was the end of my time in Neverland.
Yeah, I remember auditioning for it in Los Angeles, and I joined a couple months after they had started the second tour. So they had done it along, correct me if I'm right, it's so wrong, because I know Janet was in it. They did a tour in the 90s, and 1990, 91, and then they did ours, and it was 97 or 98. And they hadn't created an understudy for the Lost Boys. It was a hole in their production for that tour, so they created that position and then contacted me, and then I joined, and then I was there for 2 years and did both of the Broadway and the tour. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I was there from the get-go. We actually, I'm not going to give dates because that'll just date my little butt. So I'm going to start with the 90s. Yeah, I was there for the tour. We did Broadway, went back on tour, took a break, started back up again in 94. And then again in 97, went right through to filming. And then I did with Cathy another quick tour after that. And I think it was in 2000. Don't start me to lie. Somewhere in there. But I was done by 2000. And by the time the tour went out again in 2004, I hung up my Curly stick.
Oh, I just missed you because I think I saw it around 2004, 2005 when it came to Philly. And my sister and I loved it, and we got the DVD signed by Cathy, and we watched it incessantly because we had the Mary Martin VHS tape, and we would watch that all the time. And we loved both of them just the same. But, we would play this before they had you guys remember they used to have, DVDs in cars and everything like that. It would be attached to the van. But we had the ones that you actually had to use Velcro to attach to the seat. And we would watch it all the time when we were around because we just loved it so much. And our love of Peter Pan has stemmed from when we used to read the book and see the Disney film. So when was your introduction to Peter Pan? Were you a child, or had you seen the musical at some point in time before being involved with it?
For me,
again,
I did.
This might take... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Michelle.
You go, Alon. Tag, you go.
I was going to say, well, this again might date my butt, but I remember at one point seeing Sandy Duncan do it on Broadway. And that was my introduction to Peter Pan. And I remember thinking, that is amazing. One of these days, I'm going to get on that stage. Because at that point, I saw Sandy too,
and I feel like it's sort of like the James Bond thing for kids. Like everyone has their Peter Pan, but that they grew up with, and they think that is the Peter Pan. And mine was Sandy Duncan too, Alon.
Yeah, see, yes. And then we met Kathy.
Right, of course, until Kathy came along, and then Kathy.
And then
Kathy
I just
forever.
canceled everybody out.
Kathy is Peter Pan. I had done 2 productions of it in Los Angeles, right out of college. So I had done, well, not in Los Angeles. First one I did in Santa Barbara with the Civic Light Opera up there, and I was in one of the natives. And then the next time was in Thousand Oaks at their Civic Light Opera, and I played Tiger Lily. So somehow it just kept falling in my life, and I didn't know why. But I loved it. So, yeah. And Kathy walked and breathed that little child. So, like, I love the other Peter Pans, but Kathy really was like the embodiment of this child that was ageless and timeless. So, yeah, I'm kind of biased to Kathy.
So what was the audition process like? Because it sounds like, Kathy had already been at the beginning. So Alon, you were with Kathy at the beginning of this. So what was the audition process like for each of you for this particular show? Were you going out for a specific character, or was it just an open call? Because, usually the Lost Boys are played by men and Peter Pan is played by a woman. So I just didn't know for sure if they were kind of pushing the boundaries with this particular production.
When I auditioned, she had already done an arena version of this show. So this one, they knew that they were going to take it on the road and then go to Broadway at some point. So they had opened the floodgates to everybody and everything. And I went there thinking there's no way in hell I'm getting into this show, but I went anyway. And it was a process. They whittled down. And at one point, I was able to pick out who the Lost Boys were going to be. I was like, you're still here. You're still here. You're still here. Oh, I guess we're going to be it. And then we were. And I was like, yes. It was exciting.
The best feeling. Yeah. I went to an equity chorus call where they were, I don't remember if I went to both the equity chorus call and the EPA for Wendy. Because I remember doing sort of both of them, going in and doing lots and lots of dancing with Patty Colombo, and then also going in and reading with Kathy for Wendy, and definitely I remember Kathy was an incredibly generous auditioner. And she sometimes I think sometimes people audition you and it feels like they don't want you to do your best, and then there are certain people that you just feel like they are doing everything they can to make you give the best audition. And I definitely felt that way about Kathy and walked out the door and thought, I am going to be in this show. And then I wasn't for a little while, and then I got a call, I think it was probably 7 months later, and it was one of those hurry up and wait show business moments where someone had left the show at the last minute, and I got a call on Friday night, and I started on Monday, and I went on tour the next Friday.
I remember
I didn't remember that.
I remember Alon calling me, who was our dance captain, and he said, Michelle, we're auditioning a new Tootles. None of us knew that she had left, and because we were on break. And I was like, what? We're having what? And he's like, can you come in and, work here so I can watch? And so I came in, and Hally was auditioning. And I remember that. And then, a week later, you were in the show because we had kicked right back into being on tour again. So
yeah, it
it was
was
like
it was
right after the Marquee. Yeah, right after we closed Broadway and at the Marquee, we had a hiatus. They would put us on hiatus if we weren't booked in other theaters. So we would get like a month off here or there, or 2 weeks off here and there.
It was such a whirlwind and fun and intimidating coming into a cast that had all been on tour together and working at the Marquee together for so long, and we're so tight knit that everyone really helped me out.
How many shows a week did you guys do on Broadway and then for the national tour? Because I would only assume they would at least give you off a couple days during the week if somebody had to swing in and, cover that particular role.
The way that equity shows work is that equity only allows you them to work you 8 shows a week, and they have to guarantee you 1 day off. So, that's right?
But that can be our travel day. Our day off is our travel day.
It was normally our travel day.
Yeah. But oftentimes, like if they did 2 matinees, then we would work 5 evenings and 2 matinees, and we get 2 days off. And then if they had only 1 matinee, we'd work 6 evenings and 1 matinee, and we'd only get 1 day off. So it depended on how they booked that week.
It was a great tour though. We didn't move. There were some cities where we got to sit for a month. We got to spend a month in San Francisco and 2 weeks in Denver.
In Boston, we got to have an apartment in Boston. That was nice.
That's right. That was a good time. No, it was a lovely tour.
And you're mentioning that I kind of forget, and I think maybe most audiences do, when there's a national tour, you're going from theater to theater, right? And each theater is different. There's a different backstage. There are different dressing rooms. So how is that like to adapt to that new theater?
There's a different climate, too. I remember 3 specific. In New Orleans, it was so incredibly humid, and we had fog machines. And the scene with the most prolific amount of fog happened right before our 10, 12-minute dance number. And the fog turned to gel on the stage because of the severe humidity, and we were ice skating out there. It was incredibly slippery. I think they ended up cutting the fog for subsequent shows because we couldn't get through it.
Because literally we were sliding.
Oh, it was crazy. And then in Denver, they have oxygen tanks in the wings. Yeah. Because you're so high up, it's really, really hard to breathe. And then we went straight from Denver to San Francisco to sea level. And I remember thinking in San Francisco, like that was the show. Like I can do 2 in a row if you want. This is easy after Denver.
I remember in St. Louis, we were applying bug spray because it was outdoors and it was humid. So it was all about like, how do we keep ourselves from getting eaten alive while we're dancing and sweating? Yeah.
Oh, that's brutal.
Did you guys do the one where we were in Kansas City, the outdoor one, where we would have to stop when the planes go overhead? Did you do that one? Because that was an interesting experience because we were in this big outdoor arena, and they told us it's like, okay, wherever you are, you stop, you wait, and then you pick back up. It's like a commercial break. And we'd be doing stuff, and all of a sudden you hear the plane, and everything will stop, and you'd stop. Then the plane would go, and then the music would start, and then you go. It was like, what's happening? What's happening? It was weird.
Yeah, it keeps you on your toes. You definitely can't get into too much of a rut when you're on the road.
Oh, no.
Everything changes.
Like on the third act, when we went into the smaller theaters, they would have to cut like the pirate ship pretty much in half.
That's right. You had mini sets.
You're like, what the? Where are we coming from now? Oh, okay. We're gonna
and then we would get into the Wang Center, and then it was like a state Kathy could fly for days across that audience.
Yeah. the Wang Center, and then what's the one in Chicago? That was another big barn that you're like, well, this is a lot of stage to cover. Run, and you're running for days to get to the other side.
And we don't travel with everyone, so there's new crew in every city.
Mm-hmm.
And new musicians. We didn't travel with a whole orchestra, so there were a lot of, there were new musicians each time we moved.
Our staple, we did have trucks that took our sets, and our staple crew, head electricians and carpenters and stuff, came with us. The ones who ran the lights and the primary stuff, the grips and all that stuff were new wherever we landed. Paul Rubin is the master fly man, and he is the only person who flies Kathy now, or did. I don't know if she's planning on flying anymore, but she does. But,
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, and the way they rigged the flying, before at every theater and before every performance, they would take these sandbags and put them on the fly mechanism for her audience flight to test it before they put Kathy on it, because they didn't want to slam her into the audience. So they had this whole they had to practice it every venue we went to and set it up and make sure it's working every day so that she wouldn't. I got to watch that a lot from the audience.
Yeah, and we had flight rehearsal every time we got to a new theater. Yeah. Or did we do it before every show?
Not for every show. You guys did it for every venue.
Not every show.
And then they would.
Yeah.
I don't think it was every show, but they would do a fight rehearsal. They would do all the sword fighting on the ship before every show.
Right.
Right. Is that right, Alon?
Yeah, that.
I think they did. I think they might have done it before. I don't know.
Well, they
I remember
they do it every time we got into the theater.
Right.
Yes, and it was also just seemed like we had a little welcome party every time. I always looked forward to that, to flight rehearsal and fight rehearsal, that we were all like, okay, we're all on stage, we're ready to start this magic again.
Yeah. First time I flew, I cried. Kathy thought I was hurt, but I cried.
Oh,
it was so cool.
I know. I was always so jealous.
I know. But
I never got to fly
on our birthdays. You never got to do your birthday flight?
Oh, well, then I got to do the birthday flight, but in general,
Yeah.
Birthday flight? What's that?
Flew. They threw me a lot, but there was no flying.
What's the birthday
flight? I never took that for granted. I always felt incredibly lucky that I got to be a lost boy, and then I got to fly.
Was there an understudy for Kathy at all, or if she didn't go on, there was no show that day?
No, it's Janet was.
Janet
was the understudy.
Janet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And at the beginning of the tour, Aileen Quinn was the second understudy, but she never went on for it.
She was second understudy.
I got to understudy Kathy when we played the theater in the Round in Massachusetts. I suddenly can't remember the name.
The one in North Shore.
At North Shore Music Theater, I got to understudy Kathy, and it was terrifying. It was glorious and terrifying.
Well, that was a weird. Doing it in the Round.
I didn't have to go on.
Yeah, it seems like hers is the most demanding role for sure. And I know the audience is like, oh, I'd love to have that role, and I know I would too. But I know that it is also painful because it's a lot of hard work and making sure that everybody is on the same page. Because as you said, anything can happen, and sometimes things are unpredictable with where things are moving. So it has to be done to a T to make sure everybody's safe. But it can be not the most comfortable thing in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and also I think it's another sort of next level thing about Kathy is that she was the center of all of our performances and sort of the geist of the show, and so she's holding it down on so many levels. I'm sure Michelle has the same experience of going on. I went on for Elisa Segardia, who played Wendy, and I went on for her just a couple of weeks into starting the show. and didn't know what I was doing very well. And Kathy, because Wendy and Peter are so, they spend so much time together during the show, and Kathy really like directed me with her eyes throughout. Like I hadn't had to put in rehearsal or really that many rehearsals at all. And she was so intensely nurturing on stage. And I don't think I would have been able to do it if it had been someone who was just giving their performance. But she was so connected to the show, and she knew what she was doing.
She was so present in every single performance. So like as the understudy, I was jumping on for Alon, and I would jump on for Hally and all these different people. And every time I would land, you think people start to phone it in after a while. And for me, I felt like I couldn't phone it in because I was never there. Like nobody wants to phone in. Nobody was phoning it in our cast at all. But like when you turn around, you're like, how does she do this every day? And she would make total connected eye contact with you, completely in character, but also her, and like just pull you into what she's doing. Like it was absolutely amazing. Her ability to dive in and be that character all the time. And I think she only missed like 4 to 6 shows in the 2 years that we were on tour together. Is that right, Alon? She didn't miss very much.
No, I mean, she would go on in all kinds of pain, and she would just, I mean, that's what made it so exciting and never boring, and that's why nobody ever phoned it in, because they knew that no matter what, unless she could barely walk, she was going on that stage, and you knew at any given point. So you were doing your 150% to keep up. And it was exciting when you were in the wings just watching her, because like Michelle said, she was so into it and so connected and so Peter that you got lost. I remember a couple of times I heard, entrance music and stuff, and I was watching and I'm like, time to go and go, because I was so watching the show instead of being in the show. I was like, oh, this is good.
She was a mom during that whole time and a producer, and she would do all those shows, but she also did she was the one who had to go to all of the promotional events.
You can understand why she's an Olympian, because that's just her work ethic.
I love the moments on stage where it is just the Lost Boys and Peter, because it seems like you all mesh so well together, and it seems so natural and fun. And I always love that aspect of, you guys playing around and building the house for Wendy. That was always like one of my favorite Lost Boys songs, because, you guys just are having so much fun on stage, and it's such a joy to watch. And then when it comes to the point where it's the Indians and Tiger Lily that mesh with you guys to do the Ugga Wug song, that's like just in my opinion, that's my favorite part of the show, because I remember I used to dance in my living room with you guys because I wanted to know to do the dance so badly. And it's 8 minutes of that. Like, that's long.
Let's see. You mentioned that building that house. That was building the house was a terror, because sometimes you're like, oh, this is going to fall on poor Wendy. I feel for you. Bye. Running around trying to get that house up within a certain time, because it had to be built within certain measures of the music, so that you can carry on. And some days that thing was, I swear, this thing would come out, and I'm like, it's a little rickety.
We did really have fun, though. I remember when I first joined the cast, someone, we would be at the hotel, and someone said, okay, we it's time to go to work. And I thought, work? That's ridiculous. This is not work. I mean, once we got to Ugga Wug, I changed my mind, but it was so hard.
Pacing. Yeah, to just find a place to breathe. Yeah, like those moments when you're not in the front where you can take a little breath.
Yep, but it's all about breathing.
And you build the stamina for it. Like, it becomes like I don't know.
It's like second nature almost, because when the low is, and you know where to take your breath and your pause. So it's it's like the number itself. There's a wave that is automatically gets built into your breath and movements. And so when you do those bursts, you're giving it your all. And by the time you get to the very end, you're squeezing the last ounce out so that,
the last ounce. It's true.
One of the little secrets that people don't know about that show is there were a couple of buckets of backup sticks, because oftentimes the dancers were dancing so hard they would break the sticks and they would fly. So they knew where to dance their way back to grab another stick, or the cast was watching and they would pass the stick forward to someone. So there's a lot of watching each other to get through that number.
That was the actual fun part and kid part about that show. We became stunt people because you were leapfrogging over mushrooms, you were jumping off of 6-foot platforms, you were diving under moving people. It was so much fun.
Again, I think it was so cool that our production team and creative team had endless amounts of faith in our abilities. It was never a question, like Michelle and Alon both just said, of whether we could do something. Again, when we went to North Shore, we had to re-choreograph, or not I didn't re-choreograph anything, but the numbers were re-choreographed to be performed in the round. And there was a circle of dancers around the drum at one point, and they needed another body, and they put me in there, and they were like, okay, so it's just this grand jeté, and this grand jeté, and this grand jeté, and this grand jeté, go. And I thought, I didn't think anyone would ever ask me to do a grand jeté on a professional stage. And it was awesome. I think I did it. And I was so excited to be able to do it. But I loved that. I loved that feeling of being in that show, because it really was just all in.
And that's my next question is, what would go on if something did happen on stage and you kind of had to cover it up or maybe stop the show, because there are instances where things are beyond your control and sometimes the show has to go on or it just can't. So can you give me an example of what would have happened if something maybe didn't happen the way it was supposed to?
No, it would just keep going. This rarely ever happened, but I remember one I forget what city it was, Cathy, they were doing the fight sequence, and they flew her a little too hard, and she rebounded and the sword hit her just above her eye. And she was, we didn't notice anything at first, and then all of a sudden on stage we realized she was bleeding and she was doing the fight. And all of a sudden, we see her doing the fight, and she passed her sword off to Janet, who knew the fight choreography. And so Twin was fighting with Hook, and she dashed off the stage, and she came back on at a certain point and got the sword back and was fighting. And she had this patch over her eye, and she was still doing the show. And then we got to the point where we're like, yay! And we got to the front where they're transitioning the ship to the house, and we're singing in front, and there's this step that she has to climb up the pirates and Indians at the end. Started bleeding again and spun around, grabbed Wendy's nightgown and wiped her face and kept going. Blackout, run off. New bandage, and flew back through the window as if nothing happened. And we're mouth hanging open, and what the? And the audience never knew, except for if you were right up close, and you're like, why does Wendy have blood on her dress?
But that dress was so voluminous. There was so much room to use it.
So if you guys could not be a lost boy, what type of character in the show would you have liked to be? A mermaid, a fairy, a pirate, an Indian, a crocodile? What would be your base camp?
I wanted to try my hand at Smee. I wanted to be a pirate. I wanted to try my hand at Smee. And I was like, nobody's going to buy me as a pirate, so okay.
I think I'd want to be Tinkerbell, because nobody ever gets to be Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell's just a light and a keyboard. And Tinkerbell somehow shrank really small.
And right, and
She's the bomb.
just shine your light.
Yeah,
I can see that for you. I totally can.
Who would you be, Hallie? You got to be a couple people.
I'm completely stumped by this question. I love Team Tootles so much.
Yeah.
But I mean, getting to be a pirate with a sword sounds pretty cool. Or a hook. Get out. Step away, Paul Scheffler. I'm coming at you.
Yeah, I don't think Paul would appreciate that, but
but Michelle's idea, that's genius. I'm calling Tom McCoy right now, and I'm proposing that we do a new tour of Peter Pan, and I am going to be Captain Hook, and Sam is going to be Peter Pan.
Sam was
well, in that case, I had better be me.
I'll be in that scenario. I would be Michael Darling.
Oh,
that's cute.
Oh.
So can you tell me any of the fan experiences of being able to meet some of the children after the show and talk to them and, maybe pose for photos and costume?
In some cities, it was the Make-A-Wish Foundation would have a kid come after the show, to meet Kathy and Hook of the Lost Boys. So that was an amazing experience to get to be with those kids and see their faces, when they get fairy dust.
Yeah, there was one time where we actually had a kid on stage with us at the marquee that won a raffle or something, and they got to be on the ship when the Lost Boys are brought on by the pirates. Do you remember that?
No. Oh, God.
Yeah.
There
was a kid. Yeah, and you guys shuffled them into the rope tie-up, and they came out for the rope tie-ups, and they were dressed in one of I think in my costume or something, or some costume, and they were just and then they got taken off before the fight.
It's that shuffle on, and then we're
go on stage with it. Yeah.
Yes, because we got tossed back into the cabin just before the fight, and so they got tossed back in, and they never came back out.
Nope. I think the magic was seeing, people waiting for Kathy when you walk out the stage door, because that's really who they were looking for. That's one of the most special, I think, for me, experiences was being able to walk out of a theater door and seeing people with twinkles in their eyes, just enamored by the people in the show, and particularly Kathy.
There's a level of enthusiasm that I don't think you get doing performances that aren't for children. It's even in a small theater, it sort of feels more like it's some sort of arena spectacle. The excitement is so, it feels like the kids are having trouble sitting in their seats and not out of board. They're so engaged, and they're singing along, and they really think that Tinkerbell is there.
I like when they boo for Paul as Captain Hook.
Yes.
Yeah. When he takes that teddy bear from Peter just before he leaves, that kids just go nuts. It's one of my favorite moments in the show. And Paul always had a witty retort.
That's a fun part to play for sure. And it's so weird to think that it's been 20 years since the actual filming of the filmed version from 2000, and that it still plays online because they have Broadway HD and people can rent it. And Alon was so generous. I got to show it to we had a Peter Pan week last October for Halloween, and I got to show it to my residents at my senior living facility, and they loved it. They were like, wow, they're doing all these dances because they don't get to go out and see shows. So this was really special, and Alon did a little intro for them and introduced the whole show. So it was so nice. Thank you for doing that.
No, it's my pleasure. I was like, anytime I get to talk about the show and Peter, and I light up like a big kid too. And I think that's the beauty and the magic of that show, is that, as adults, the minute we see it or we're in the theater, we turn into little boys and girls and just let our imaginations go, and we're in Neverland. The minute those darling kids fly out the window, we're with them. We're hooked. Right until they fly back. You're on this journey
hooked.
then.
No pun intended.
That's the whole
Story. We're in Neverland.
yeah.
You're not
Yeah,
aging.
and I refuse to grow up. I will not grow up. Period.
No way.
I think that's a great note to end on. And my final question to you guys is, if you could explain the experience of being a part of this Peter Pan legacy with Cathy and the rest of the cast and crew with one word, what would that be?
Joy.
Magic.
Thankful.